I did wait a while to make a video like this when it comes to Battlefield 6 and even Red Sec, as we've had a lot of changes to weapon bloom, recoil, movement bloom, aim assist, and also dead zone settings for controller, and a lot of that will affect your aim inside Battlefield, and this video is going to give you as many tips as I possibly can to help you win more gunfights. Some of these are aim tips, some of these are general tips, and some of these will definitely help you win way more gunfights inside this game. So let's get straight into it. So the first tip is centering. Now I kind of need to show you this one live in a game because centering is kind of difficult to explain. Essentially, you want to have your crosshair where you believe enemies to be coming from. So let's say we're running up this portion of the map, or we're turning this corner here, or we've got this guy trying to flank on us. Now, some of this stuff comes with playing the game and game knowledge, but a lot of this is just pretty straightforward stuff. For example, this guy up here, you want to make sure your crosshair is at least middle of your screen. So that is if you're really struggling, just make sure you're not aiming at the ground too often, or you're not aiming too high. You're aiming right at the center, and now you can pick your shots, right? If you know a player might be camping over here, you already want to have your crosshairs over there. Again, it's similar down here, or even in this kind of archway where people will be running through. Now, if you're playing objective-based mode, or if you know where the spawns are for the most part, if you're playing a lot of close quarters, then you can easily crosshair place on the objective, as you know that enemies are either coming to push your objective if you've captured plenty, or they're camping on the objective where it is red in the first place. So as you can see, if you've got your crosshairs placed up here, you'll see where most of the enemies are, and you can then predict where they're going to be. And if you're being shot from a certain location as well, as you can, with the red markers on the screen, then you want to make sure you're focusing and looking towards those red markers, these hit indicators. The next tip is when to strafe and when not to strafe. Now, strafing is when you move left and right and you fire your gun, right? So when you're moving and firing, and as you can see, when you're doing that with assault rifles, you're getting tons of extra weapon bloom, and it's pretty crazy the amount of bloom you get with this. Now, as you gradually get to more closer range weapons, so if you go from an assault rifle to a carbine, there's less of this bloom spread. And then if you go from a carbine to an SMG, there's even less of this bloom spread effect. Now, that means because you should be using those weapons more at close range and you should be strafing, that's why they have less bloom, right? So essentially, when you want to be strafing is at close range. So this is where you want to be strafing, this kind of range here, or even in this range here, or maybe even this range here, right? That is probably the maximum ranges where I recommend strafing with your gun. And essentially what you're doing is making sure the enemy's missing their shots whilst you're landing your shots, and you want to counter your aiming for the strafe, right? So if you're strafing left, you need to move your aim more right, and if you're moving right, you need to move your aim more left, and that's to keep it central, right? So you want to keep your aim nice and central, and you want to focus on doing that with your aim. So if we're looking at this target here, every time I'm moving left, I'm moving my aim the opposite way. Every time I'm moving right, I'm moving my aim the opposite way, trying to stay on target as much as I possibly can. And that is how you actually strafe. Now, at times you don't want to be strafing as well, and that is when you're at super long ranges. You want to make sure you're focusing on hitting your shots as much as possible without getting crazy bloom, because at longer ranges the bloom is way more noticeable, and that is where you know that you're missing your shots. So you want to focus on being steady, being still, and controlling your aim to land as many shots as possible, because that will get you better results at longer range, especially depending on which gun you have. If you're using an SMG at super long range, it actually can still work if you strafe, but if you're using an assault rifle or an LMG, then I highly recommend basically standing still and firing your gun. The other tip is recoil control. Now, how you want to actually test this, you want to go into the firing range, you want to stand against this wall here, and you want to test the recoil of your gun up against this wall. And essentially, if you fire it without controlling anything, you'll see how much recoil your gun actually has. So this is the Scar assault rifle, and as you can see, it doesn't have tons of recoil, and even if you didn't control it at all, it actually kind of clusters together anyway. Now, let's see if we can try and make this more accurate by pulling down, and we can't really compensate for the side-to-side recoil, but we can compensate for how high up and down vertically it goes. So what we're going to do is try and compensate for that a little bit more, and as you can see, we're a slight bit more accurate, right? We've not got that kind of upwards to the top there. It's kind of cut it down by a little bit by just controlling the recoil, but obviously some of this is horizontal control as well. Now, this will be more noticeable on other guns and a bit less noticeable on certain guns, so it depends on which weapon you're using, because some guns have more recoil than others, of course. So if you now pick the B36 for example, and we fire this weapon without controlling it, As you can see, this gun has quite a bit of recoil, whether it's horizontally and vertically. But if we try and control it this time, we're getting rid of all that vertical and we're just left with the horizontal, right? So that's how that works. So as you can see, that is the B36. And then that is also the B36, right? Controlling your recoil. So just make sure at least bare minimum you're pulling downwards on your analog stick. But if you want to be super accurate with this, you want to kind of test the recoil pattern of the weapon. And then what you want to do after that is you actually want to compensate fully for it. So this one's going upwards and to the right. So you actually want to pull down and to the left, and that will counter that the most. But even if you're just pulling downwards on your stick, that is good enough inside this game. So what do you do if your gun has too much bloom and too much recoil that you can't even control it and you're really struggling to hit those shots at super long ranges? Well, at this point you want to start tap firing your weapon, especially if it's a full auto gun. Obviously you want to tap fire it, and as you can see, the first couple of shots are always with no bloom whatsoever, right? And this way you're making use of the no bloom aspect, and you're basically getting the first couple of shots every single time. Now obviously you're slowing down your fire rate with this because you're not getting the full auto fire rate, which means that your time to kill will be a little bit slower with all your guns, but this way you're hitting more of your shots, and obviously you're not running out of ammo and having to reload constantly. Now this works super well, like I said, for certain guns. As you can see, the B36 is now a lot more accurate doing this. But there's another way you can do this as well. You can basically turn your gun into the semi-fire mode. So if you aim down sight and press down on your D-pad, you're then in semi-fire mode, right? Which you could just keep tap firing the gun itself. Now, as you can see here, this gun is very accurate, and now you're not getting any bloom or recoil for that matter as well, and you're able to hit your shots. Now, certain guns, depending on which one you're using, will have a burst fire mode as well, which can actually be very useful, and I might make a video all about that. But for the meantime, and for just kind of making sure you land your shots, you can use the semi-fire mode if you're running these weapons at stupidly far ranges where you might not be hitting your shots. The next step is tracking, and this is whether or not the target is moving left to right or right to left. I recommend practicing this in the casual breakthrough mode because this will give you a better understanding of how to do it. But essentially you want to pull down on your recoil stick as well as tracking the target left to right. So as you can see here, we've got probably what's a real player right now because they're actually trying to hit their shots. And all of this is done all together at the exact same time. So you're going to see there's players all over the place. There's a tank right there, which we need to kind of avoid. But again, there's that guy right there who was hiding behind the cover, right? And you need to try and track his movements to some extent. Now, tracking is definitely one of the harder things to do. So you want to make sure you've practiced this quite a bit, because once you get tracking down, you can actually aim and kill enemies a lot easier. So as you can see here, we're able to track their movements, and people don't really move a lot unless they're running from one point to another. But it tends to be people stood still inside Battlefield. But like I said, look, if you follow their movements nice and smoothly, you're actually going to do a lot better than trying to make like crazy adjustments left and right all the time. But when it comes to tracking, you don't just use your right analog stick to track, as that is probably the hardest way to actually do it, especially on controller anyway. You actually want to use your left analog stick as well from time to time. Now, there is no such thing as rotational aim assist inside Battlefield 6, which makes it a lot harder for controller players, obviously. But like I said, even just getting that final adjustments and those smaller adjustments with the left stick is going to help you so much more to track left and right. So essentially, you're moving your player in the direction the other player's moving. Now, keep in mind, this is going to give you a bit more bloom. Another tip is to use your hip fire. Hip firing inside Battlefield is actually super accurate if you put on any sort of laser attachment. You can actually hip fire even up to about 10 to 20 meters, which is absolutely insane in my opinion. And it's actually very accurate depending on which gun you're using. And then obviously if you're using things like an assault rifle, you're going to be dealing a lot of hip fire damage as well. So make sure you're using your hip fire, because this is actually going to allow you to win a lot more gunfights at that super close range that you didn't even really expect that you could. And you don't even really need to focus on aiming down sights and wasting extra milliseconds doing all that. You can literally just start firing your weapon straight away and you're going to get some easy kills. The next step is choosing the correct optic, because not all optics are created equal inside Battlefield 6, and we've made a whole video on which ones are the best optics to use, which ones give you the clearer sight picture, and I'll leave that linked at the end of this one. But the ones I like right now are the Mini Flex. I do also like the ROM. The ROM is pretty solid as well. And then also the BF2M. Now, if you're using rifles, these are the ones that I would recommend without crazy amounts of zoom. But if you do like the extra zoom, then that is up to your preference. Last but not least, the final tip is choosing the correct recoil attachments. Now, the muzzles and also the underbarrel grips are the only two attachments that can help with recoil on your weapon. And this is where you want to focus on the precision and control stats for your gun. Now, we've made guides on the channel in terms of specific guns, specific weapons, ones that have super low recoil, and the ones that you should be focusing on unlocking, all already on the channel, so I'll leave that linked down below. But like I said, just make sure you try and focus on those two stats, precision and control, and that should help you out with pretty much any gun anyways. So there we have it. Those are all the tips that will give you the best possible aim and allow you to win way more gunfights inside Battlefield 6. If you enjoyed this video and you learned something new, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and thank you very much for watching.